Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take those big, messy subjects and, well, try to pull out the insects that actually matter for you. Today, we're not exactly looking at your spreadsheets. It's more about the thinking behind the balance sheet. We're going deep into how the ancient Stoics handled money, wealth, status, all that stuff that, let's be honest, keeps a lot of us up at night. You know, that cycle of chasing financial freedom while battling financial anxiety. That's our focus.
Yeah, and it's such a relevant topic. I mean, so much of modern life revolves around security, maybe fear of missing out, all the anxieties tied to money. It really dominates our thinking. The Stoic approach here is, well, it's a challenge. It's about finding that discipline, that real freedom. Freedom not just from worrying about being poor, but also from getting completely distracted and, frankly, overwhelmed by having too much luxury.
Okay, let's start right there, at the foundation. Because the Stoic view on wealth, it can sound really strange to our modern ears, especially in a consumer culture. They call wealth an indifferent, adiaphora. That word indifferent, it sounds like they just don't care about money at all. But, we still have bills to pay. So what does that really mean? What's the core idea?
It's fundamentally about moral value, or the lack of it in this case. The Stoics were incredibly strict on this. They argued that virtue, and that's a big category, including wisdom, justice, courage, self-control, all those inner qualities of your mind, your psyche, that is the only genuine good. And consequently, vice is the only genuine evil.
Okay.
So that means everything outside your character, everything subject to chance, things like your health, whether you're sick, pleasure, your reputation, and yes, huge amounts of wealth, or conversely, really tough poverty.
Yeah.
All those are just indifference.
Right. So let me get this straight. If I work for years, build a business, sell it for a massive amount, in the philosophical sense, I haven't actually gained anything good, just
Right.
a really big indifference.
That's exactly it. You've acquired something that's, useful, definitely powerful, externally beneficial, no doubt. But it doesn't, in and of itself, make you happier or more fulfilled. In the Stoic sense, that idea of eudaimonia, or flourishing. If you were, say, kind of a jerk before you sold the company, well, now you're just a richer jerk. The money itself didn't change your core character.
But hang on, the Stoics weren't all, monks living off nothing, right? There must be some nuance here, because surely having some money is generally better than having none, for practical reasons.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the crucial point that makes the philosophy workable in the real world, not just some abstract ideal. These indifferents, wealth included, they describe them as the sphere in which virtue may act. Think of that like this. Wealth isn't good in itself, but it's a really powerful tool. A wise person can use that tool for tremendous good. Being generous, funding public works, supporting education. But someone driven by vice could use the exact same tool for, say, oppression or just wasteful self-indulgence. The tool itself is neutral. It's the user, their character, that brings the moral dimension.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is basically to figure out the Stoic user manual for this tool for wealth. We need to unpack how they thought about earning it, wanting it, managing it, and especially look at their critiques of luxury. They had a lot to say about that and what they meant by internal richness, that true, lasting kind of wealth.
Precisely. We're exploring the art, really, of using these external circumstances virtuously, acknowledging that, yeah, sure, having some wealth is generally preferable to being destitute, but it should never, ever become the main goal, the ultimate focus of your life's energy.
All right, whenever we talk Stoicism, we inevitably have to start with Epictetus and his big idea, the dichotomy of control. And this isn't just some, clever mental trick. It's really the underlying structure that explains why wealth can't be considered a genuine good.
It really is the bedrock. Epictetus hammered home the need to distinguish, very carefully, between what's truly in our power and what isn't. In our power, our judgments, our desires, our opinions, the actions that follow from those. Not in our power, well, basically everything else. Our bodies, our possessions, our reputation, external events like suddenly getting rich or losing everything.
And the philosophical reason for drawing that line so sharply, especially with money, is, well, if your happiness depended on external things, like having a huge savings account or your stocks going up, your happiness would be constantly at the mercy of luck, of fortune. Imagine spending, say, 10 years pouring everything into building your net worth, and then boom, a market crash, some natural disaster, political chaos, and it's gone.
If your happiness is fundamentally tied to that external number, that external thing, you are setting yourself up for constant emotional turmoil. Fear, anxiety, the whole roller coaster. If the highest good, your ultimate happiness, can be wiped out by things you absolutely cannot control, then it's not really the highest good, is it? It's not reliable. That's precisely why the Stoics insisted the real good had to be internal, inside your own mind and character.
Okay, but let's push back on that a little. If I'm completely broke, starving,
Yeah.
it's pretty hard to practice generosity, isn't it? Or even basic fairness if I'm desperate. Doesn't that necessity make wealth at least sometimes functionally good?
And that brings us to a really important refinement, something the later Stoics, especially in the Middle Stoa, really developed. While wealth isn't a true good, it doesn't automatically improve your character. It is generally considered a preferable indifferent. The term was progmena. This is where the philosophy really connects with, everyday practical living.
Ah, okay. Progmena. Preferable and different. So what makes wealth preferable if it's not actually good? It feels a little bit like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, philosophically speaking, justifying having stuff.
It's a fair point, it can sound like that. But the distinction, while subtle, is really important. A preferable indifferent acts as an instrumental aid. It helps you practice virtue, or as they put it makes it possible for us to do our duty. Let's face it, it is generally easier to act virtuously if you're healthy and have some resources, compared to being sick and penniless.
Can you give a concrete example? How does it help?
Sure. If you have, say, adequate wealth, you're in a much better position to practice the virtue of generosity, dichotomy. You could fund a community project, help a neighbor who's struggling. That's a virtuous action enabled by the wealth.
Mm-hmm.
If you're completely broke, you might still want to be generous. You might have the right intention, but your ability to act on it is severely limited. So the wealth is preferred specifically because it facilitates that virtuous action, not because you should just pile up wealth for its own sake. The preference is about external utility. The actual moral value still resides entirely in your character and your intention.
Got it. So if the community project I funded collapses or I lose the money, I've lost the preferable and different, the tool, but I haven't lost the good part, which was the generous intention, the character I was trying to exercise.
Exactly right. And this wasn't just theory. Seneca is a fantastic case study here. He was incredibly wealthy, politically powerful, but he also went through serious adversity. He really stress-tested this idea of indifference during his 8 years exiled on Corsica.
Yeah, that's such a crucial story. One minute he's advising the emperor, probably one of the richest men in Rome, and the next, poof, gone. What exactly did he lose during that exile? What was taken away?
He lost his senatorial rank, which was huge. He lost his public standing, his influence network, that gratia, which was vital for Roman elites. And he had about half his considerable property confiscated. Now, for a typical Roman noble, this would have been utterly devastating, a complete social and personal catastrophe. But Seneca's reaction, which we see in his writings from exile, was pure stoicism. He basically said, these are just indifferents. They don't touch the real business of living a good life.
He famously wrote, "It is the mind that makes us rich." And the power in that line comes from where he was writing it. Not from a palace, but from a pretty barren island.
Exactly. And he really fleshed that out. He argued that even in the harshest wilderness, the mind possesses its own internal wealth. Its ability to reason, to contemplate the universe, its fundamental self-sufficiency, that's the real treasure. He insisted that the only thing you really need for this inner richness is just enough to, keep the body alive. His external situation was objectively miserable, but his inner state, his true wealth, grounded in reason and nature, that remained untouched. It was independent of all the political drama back in Rome.
So that really hammers home the main point of this first part. Wealth, just as an external fact, isn't good or bad in itself. It's just the stage. And we choose whether to act virtuously or not on that stage.
Right. And pinning your hopes, your happiness on the stage itself?
Yeah.
Well, that's setting yourself up for failure because the stage will inevitably change.
Okay, so we've established wealth is neutral, a tool. But our human reaction to it, that's far from neutral. Seneca, especially, seemed almost obsessed with warning about the downsides, the real dangers of having too much prosperity.
He certainly was. And maybe because he was so wealthy himself, he had a front row seat to its potential problems. Seneca wrote very clearly that anyone who gives themselves over completely to fortune's power, which is essentially what happens when you focus solely on accumulating massive, unnecessary wealth, has basically set himself up for a great and inescapable mental turmoil.
That feels really backward compared to how we often think today, doesn't it? We tend to see wealth as the path to peace of mind. More money, fewer problems.
But Seneca looked around at the wealthy Romans he knew and saw something different. He observed that getting rich often just means swapping one set of problems for another. It's not an end to troubles, it's just a change in troubles. You might stop worrying about rent, sure, but now you're worrying about investments, protecting assets, managing complex affairs, the constant fear of losing it all. He even pointed out that rivals, like the Epicureans, sort of agreed on this point for many people. Getting rich just meant exchanging anxieties. The underlying engine of worry just finds new, bigger things to latch onto.
What's really striking, though, is how deep this perceived risk goes. It's not just that wealth brings new worries. Seneca actually claimed that excessive, uninterrupted good fortune is really bad for us.
Mhm.
How could having things always go your way actually be bad?
It's bad for your character development. That's the core Stoic idea. They believe virtue is forged in difficulty through facing challenges. If life is just too easy, you become, well, soft. Uninterrupted wealth, Seneca warned, just makes us lazy, complacent, we start taking things for granted, and we inevitably become greedy for even more. You never get a chance to develop those crucial Stoic muscles, patience, courage, resilience, because life never really forces you to. You're never truly tested by scarcity or loss.
It reminds me of that military analogy. A good general doesn't keep their best troops back, they send them into the toughest fights. Adversity becomes a sign of strength, a chance to prove virtue. So, in that view, uninterrupted luxury is actually the real misfortune.
It's the ultimate misfortune for the soul, yes, because it stops it from reaching its potential. Hardship is the gym for character. If you never have to figure things out when resources are tight, if you never have to practice self-control because you can just buy whatever you want, those virtues simply wither away.
And this links directly to that contrast between living a life of purpose versus just accumulating
True.
pleasures, right? We hear that all the time, a life packed with fun, but lacking meaning feels empty.
Absolutely. Think about how pleasure works.
Mm.
A healthy, virtuous life naturally puts pursuing fleeting pleasures second. The main goal is optimizing your actions overall, like becoming a better person, contributing to society, learning. If you try to build a happy life just by stacking up pleasures, the latest gadget, the fanciest meal, the most luxurious vacation, Seneca saw that as utterly futile.
Futile. Why futile? What's the psychological trap there?
The Stoics definitely recognize what we now call hedonic adaptation. Each pleasure feels good for a bit, but then it fades. And the next time, you need something bigger, more expensive, to get the same kick. Seneca warned that if you try to fill your life this way, the coffers will be empty every morning. The pleasure just evaporates, leaving nothing substantial behind, no lasting satisfaction. You need that sense of purpose, that vessel to give those experiences meaning and residue. Otherwise, they just drain away, and you're stuck on this exhausting treadmill, always chasing the next hit, always acquiring more.
Okay, so the way out of this cycle, the self-defeating accumulation and the stress it brings, is simplicity. Seneca strongly recommended a path of voluntary simplicity.
Yes, but crucially, he wasn't saying everyone must be poor. He was demanding self-awareness about what's truly necessary. He urged us to measure everything against our natural needs. And importantly, he argued those natural needs are actually quite minimal and can be met very cheaply or even for free.
So what does nature actually need, according to Seneca?
His famous line boils it down to basically some food and shelter. That's it. The vast majority of what we spend money on, the fancy cars, huge houses, endless clothes, isn't driven by real need. It's driven by opinion, by wanting status, or maybe fearing what others think if we don't have those things. By choosing voluntary simplicity, even if you happen to be wealthy, you shield yourself. You protect your mind from that constant turmoil of chasing and fearing the loss of stuff that is fundamentally unnecessary. You minimize your exposure to the whims of fortune.
Right, that brings us squarely into the practical side. If the goal is this kind of self-sufficiency, being content with what's necessary, how do you actually do that? How does a Stoic build that financial discipline, especially when the world is constantly telling us to want more? This seems like where Epictetus's framework for ethical training really comes into play.
Definitely. Epictetus laid out 3 core areas, or disciplines, for ethical development. The first one is the discipline of desire and aversion, and it's incredibly relevant to money. Applied to our finances, this discipline is about making sure our wishes, our desires, actually line up with reality. The goal is that nothing happens contrary to what we wish.
It sounds a bit like philosophical budgeting, but instead of tracking dollars, you're tracking your desires. How does that mental work actually prevent financial stress?
It's about engineering your mind for tranquility, for ataraxia, freedom from disturbance. The specific goal for the philosopher regarding desire is to navigate life without uneasiness, without fear, without perturbation. So when it comes to wealth, this means actively training ourselves not to desire things outside our direct control. Like, don't pin your hopes on winning the lottery or landing that one huge contract or getting a specific return on the stock market. If we stop desiring those external outcomes that we ultimately can't guarantee, We cut off a huge source of potential anxiety and fear right at the root.
Okay, so let's say someone listening opens their investment app, sees the market is tanking. The Stoic discipline isn't about hitting sell or buy. It's about examining the internal thought, the judgment that says, this crash is terrible for me.
Precisely. The market crashing is just an external event, an indifferent. The suffering comes from the judgment. This crash ruins my chances of living a good life. That judgment is where the pain originates. So financial discipline in this sense means acting responsibly with what you do control, like saving reasonably, spending moderately, earning your money ethically. But crucially, you withhold your desire, your emotional investment from the outcome, how big the returns are, how quickly your wealth grows. You focus on your actions, not the results beyond your control.
And this kind of disciplined life, centered on inner virtue rather than external wealth, was actually highly respected in ancient Rome, wasn't it? Even when it involved actual poverty. They had these really powerful stories, anecdotes that show this reverence for voluntary simplicity. We should probably touch on a few. They really illustrate the point.
Oh, they're essential. They're great examples of autarkia, that ideal of self-sufficiency. Take Cincinnatus. Lucius Quincius Cincinnatus. He was an aristocrat, came from a noble family, but when the Senate sent messengers to tell him he'd been appointed dictator, the highest emergency office in Rome, where did they find him? They found him plowing his own small field, just 4 acres of land.
Wow. The absolute peak of power in the Republic, and the guy's literally got his hands dirty on a tiny farm. What does that tell us about their values around wealth?
It tells us his real honor, his true wealth, wasn't in land or titles. It was in his character, his readiness to serve the state when called upon. He clearly didn't need or crave the usual perks of power or a vast estate. And after he led the army, defeated the enemy, the Aequi, saved Rome, he held that supreme power for just 16 days, just long enough to get the job done. Then he immediately resigned and went straight back to his little farm. Yeah. His focus, as the historians put it, was renown from war, leaving its advantages to the state. His poverty wasn't seen as shameful. It was honored because it showed his priorities were right. Service and virtue, not personal gain.
That's such a stark contrast to, well, often the expectation today that holding high office should somehow lead to personal enrichment.
It absolutely is. Or look at Marcus Attilius Regulus, another famous Roman, a hero from the First Punic War against Carthage. While he was commanding the Roman army over in Africa, he actually had to write back to the Senate requesting permission to come home temporarily.
Why? What was the emergency?
The emergency was that the hired hand who looked after his tiny farm again, just 4 acres, had apparently run off, and the farm was going to ruin. Regulus needed to get back to cultivate his land himself, otherwise his family wouldn't have enough food.
Wait, a Roman general leading a major military campaign had to worry about personally farming his subsistence plot.
Incredible, isn't it? It shows this deep contentment with very little. Here's a man capable of commanding legions, potentially seizing vast amounts of plunder, yet his personal life was so modest that the neglect of his tiny farm was a genuine crisis requiring his personal attention. His self-worth clearly wasn't tied to the spoils of war he could bring back. It was tied to his virtue, his duty, and his ability to live simply and independently off his own small piece of land.
And there's also the story of Cleanthes, the philosopher, showing self-sufficiency through sheer hard work.
Yes, Cleanthes. He succeeded Zeno as head of the Stoic school. He came from a poor background and was known for being penniless. To support himself while studying philosophy during the day, he worked manual labor jobs at night, things like drawing water for gardens or kneading dough in a bakery. He was apparently physically very strong, but had no money. When friends saw how hard he worked and offered him financial help, he refused. His reply was something like, he earned enough to feed himself, and if he really wanted to, he could probably earn enough to feed another Cleanthes too. It just showed this incredible resourcefulness and self-reliance. He found a way to pursue his passion, philosophy, without depending on handouts.
So these examples really connect Stoic financial behavior back to that idea of appropriate actions, the kathikanta.
Right. Things like managing your money, sensibly earning an honest living, saving what you can, paying your debts. These fall into that category of kathikanta. They are becoming actions, things that are fitting or appropriate for a rational person to do. They deal with those indifferents, like money, in a reasonable way. Yeah. However, this is key. These actions aren't considered inherently virtuous in themselves unless they are performed by the hypothetical Stoic sage, the perfectly wise person, acting with flawless reason.
Okay, so for the rest of us who aren't perfect sages, how should we approach these financial duties, these kathikanta?
For us, the aim is simpler. It's about doing the best we can with our intention and our effort. We try to act justly, prudently, responsibly in our financial dealings. But critically, we have to accept that we don't control the final outcome. The results are ultimately up to fate, external circumstances.
Ah, that's the famous archer analogy, isn't it? The archer does everything possible to shoot well, stance, draw, aim, release. That's the virtue, the effort. But whether the arrow actually hits the target depends on things like the wind, factors outside the archer's control. Hitting or missing doesn't change the quality of the archer's action.
Exactly. So tying your sense of self-worth, your happiness, to the outcome of a financial action, like whether that risky investment pays off huge, or if your new business becomes a unicorn that's setting yourself up for constant disappointment. The Stoic approach is to focus your judgment and intention on performing the action virtuously. Manage resources well, give appropriately, live without extravagance. Whether you end up rich or just getting by as a result, that's external. That outcome needs to be accepted with tranquility. That acceptance, that inner peace, regardless of the balance sheet, is the real goal of Stoic financial discipline.
Okay, let's shift to what feels like the ultimate Stoic safety net. The kind of wealth that can't be touched by, emperors confiscating your property or shipwrecks or stock market meltdowns. This powerful Stoic claim. The wise man can lose nothing. He has everything invested in himself.
That statement really gets to the absolute core of Stoic self-sufficiency. It sounds bold, maybe even arrogant, but it follows logically from everything we've discussed. If your genuine well-being, your good, is located entirely inside in your character, your ability to reason, your virtue, then what of real value can fortune possibly take away? Seneca's point is that losing external things, even preferred ones like health or money, is just losing tools. Useful tools, sure, but just tools. Your fundamental capacity to live wisely, to exercise virtue, that remains intact.
But let's make that practical for someone listening today. If the Stoic wise man loses their job or gets a serious illness or their reputation is ruined, things that feel pretty essential for just surviving, let alone thriving, can they really be okay? Can they truly lose nothing of value?
Seneca and others are careful here. Being okay or satisfied doesn't mean you're happy about losing your job or getting sick. Of course not. Health is preferable to sickness. Having an income is preferable to none. These things are undesirable to lose. However, the loss of these external things does not destroy your ability to live a good, rational, virtuous life. That's the key. Your happiness, your eudaimonia, is invested in those internal goods: wisdom, justice, courage, moderation. Those remain under your control, within your mind. They can't be damaged by losing your job or your health.
So you're drawing a very clear line between, say, the functional usefulness of your body or your bank account and the actual moral quality of your soul, your inner self.
Precisely. Think about it. If someone loses a hand, their body is impaired, yes. But their capacity for reason, for judgment, for virtue that remains whole. If their fortune is wiped out, their ability to make rational choices, to show resilience, to practice patience, and those are still available. According to the Stoics, the only thing that can truly harm your soul, your inner self, is a failure of your own reason. That failure manifests as vice, like giving in to uncontrolled anger, or paralyzing fear, or corrosive envy. And crucially, those vices are entirely self-inflicted wounds. They come from within, from our own bad judgments.
This connects so strongly with Marcus Aurelius and his idea of the inner citadel. It's more than just a nice metaphor. He saw it as a real defensible space within the mind.
Yes, it's the ultimate internal wealth management strategy, you could say. The inner citadel is the soul's fortress. It's where you store what's truly valuable. Your principles, your reason, your capacity for virtue. Nothing external, not market downturns, not nasty critiques from others, not even physical pain can breach those walls or damage the treasure inside.
Yeah.
Marcus constantly reminded himself. External events are just external events. They have no inherent moral quality. The only thing that can harm your soul is your own decision, your assent to destructive judgments about those events.
So the real power lies entirely in that central command center of the mind, the governing part, the hegemonikon, as the Greeks called it.
Yes, if it chooses to remain free. That governing part, your reason, is inherently free from depending on external things like wealth or status, unless it chooses to make itself dependent. It remains free from disturbance unless it chooses to disturb itself by agreeing with irrational judgments based on fear or greed or anger. Marcus Aurelius was adamant. Our troubles arise almost entirely from our own internal judgments about things, not from the things themselves. Things do not penetrate within us, he wrote. The power to decide what's good or bad always rests inside.
This whole philosophical system really forces a radical shift in where we invest our life's energy, doesn't it? In a world that's absolutely obsessed with maximizing external gains and avoiding external losses, the Stoics basically say, hold on, prioritize the one crucial task, living well.
Exactly. And that loops back perfectly to Seneca's profound advice about time, which he saw as our most critical, non-renewable resource. He argued that the truly wise people throughout history eventually gave up that endless chase for more pleasure, more money, more fleeting success. Instead, they focused their time and energy squarely on self-improvement, on learning to live rationally, on mastering themselves.
Because if you mismanage your time, you're essentially bankrupting your most valuable asset, regardless of what your financial statement says.
Precisely. Seneca was quite blunt about it. The goal isn't just to live for a long time, it's to make full use of the time you have each day, devoting that time to cultivating your inner self. He basically said, if we waste our days chasing externals and never addressing our own flaws, our own irrational judgments, we could live to be 1,000 years old and still die, having barely lived a truly human, fully realized life. The wise investor, in the Stoic view, invests their time above all else.
So wrapping this up, the Stoic path to financial freedom isn't really about complex investment strategies or frugality hacks, though those might play a role. It's fundamentally a psychological discipline. It involves clearly defining what you actually need, consciously avoiding the traps of luxury, both the complacency and the anxiety it brings, and most importantly, recognizing that your real, permanent wealth is your character, your virtue, your capacity for reason.
That sums it up perfectly. And what's remarkable about Stoicism is that it makes this good life accessible to literally everyone. It cuts right across socioeconomic lines because it argues the connection between your external circumstances, whether you're rich or poor, healthy or sick, and your actual happiness is quite loose. It's mediated entirely by how you use your reason. That internal power of choice that's available to everyone no matter the size of their bank account.
We've spent this deep dive exploring how chasing external stuff often brings more anxiety than peace. So, for a final thought, let's take a provocative line from Seneca about punishment and maybe apply it to our modern relationship with money and all those external metrics we chase.
Right. Seneca wrote something striking. Whoever expects punishment already suffers it, and whoever has deserved it expects it. Now let's twist that slightly and apply it to wealth accumulation. We have to ask ourselves, what anxiety are we already suffering right now by relentlessly chasing material possessions that we've mistaken for genuine goods? What kind of self-imposed mental torture are we creating by constantly checking the metrics, the net worth, the comparisons with others, the fear of the next market dip? Are we, in effect, building an inner fortress of fear around these external things rather than cultivating that truly self-sufficient, untouchable wealth of the mind? That's the really challenging question the Stoics' wall forces us to confront.